The laughter came first, sharp, elegant, and perfectly synchronized like a pack of wolves in designer gowns. I stood at the entrance of the Langston Grand Ballroom, clutching the small silver clutch that suddenly felt too heavy, watching a sea of sequined dresses and champagne glasses turn in unison toward me. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe they were smiling. Maybe they were glad I came. Then I heard my mother's voice clear-cutting, coated in fake sweetness. "Elena, darling, you actually wore that. How creative." A ripple of amusement followed, low and poisonous. My father gave a weary sigh from the head table, murmuring just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. At least she showed up. Chloe, my younger sister and the star of the evening, stood near the wedding arch in her Vera Wang gown, radiant under the chandeliers. She tilted her head, studying me the way a sculptor might study a flaw in marble. "It's cute," she said finally, loud enough for her bridesmaids to snicker like something from a charity event. The laughter broke open fully this time. I felt the air leave my lungs as dozens of manicured hands covered smirking mouths, the sound bouncing off crystal and marble. My dress, light blue, soft and simple, suddenly felt like a spotlight of shame. But what none of them saw was that I had made it myself. Every stitch was mine, every hour of work sewn between office deadlines and midnight coffee. They saw something cheap. I saw the last thing I made before I stopped apologizing for who I was. I smiled, but not the kind that says I'm fine. The kind that hides a storm. Catherine Brooks. My mother leaned over to a guest and whispered with theatrical pity, "She's always had that thrift store taste." My father, Charles, chuckled behind his glass of bourbon. My chest burned. They were beautiful, polished, perfect, and heartless. I looked around the ballroom, white orchids dripping from the ceiling, a live jazz band playing softly, photographers circling like sharks, and I realized I had walked straight into the theater of my own humiliation. I could have stayed silent. I could have turned and left as I had so many times before. But not tonight. Not after everything I had sacrificed for them. Not after the years of being the daughter who worked while Chloe sparkled, the one who cleaned up their messes, but never earned a seat at their table. The master of ceremonies raised his mic, announcing Chloe and Bradley's first dance. Applause filled the air. My mother's diamonds caught the light. My father's smile was the kind that looked good in photographs. And I, standing there in the dress they despised, felt a strange calm wash over me. They thought this was their perfect night. They had no idea it was mine too, just for a different reason. As Chloe passed by me on her way to the dance floor, she leaned in, voice dripping honey and poison. "Don't take it personally, Elena. Not everyone is meant to be the main character." I met her eyes and said softly, "You're right." She smiled, pleased with herself, and turned away. I watched her spin under the chandeliers, surrounded by the applause of people who believed this was the pinnacle of her life. They didn't see the crack forming the invisible line that would split this night in two. I glanced toward the glass doors leading to the terrace. Through them, I saw a man in a dark suit standing by the entrance. Tall, composed, his expression unreadable. He gave the slightest nod. My heart stilled. Julian was here. My mother's laughter carried again, brittle and sharp. I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and started walking toward the center of the room. Every eye followed me, every whisper sharpened, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. They thought I came here to watch my sister's wedding. They were wrong. I came to end a lifetime of silence. To understand that moment, you'd have to know what it meant to grow up as a Brooks in Chicago's Lincoln Park, where reputation was currency and love came with conditions. My parents built their world on appearances, not affection. From the outside, we were the perfect family. The Brooks name etched on charity walls, glossy family portraits framed in Italian silver, but inside that house, warmth was a rumor. My mother, Catherine, used to say, "People don't need to like you, darling. They just need to envy you." She wore her beauty like a weapon, her pearls like armor. Every mirror in the house reflected her triumph, never her truth. My father, Charles, was a man who mistook control for strength. He managed his family the way he managed real estate, calculating value, discarding what didn't appreciate over time. Chloe was the property he invested in. I was the one he quietly wrote off. From the day Chloe was born, my mother called her our miracle, as if I'd been a rehearsal. Chloe's crib was carved from Italian woodmine from the discount catalog. At family dinners, my father would raise a glass to her latest dance recital, while my report cards with perfect grades were left unopened on the counter. She tries, my mother would sigh about me, but effort doesn't make elegance. Those words burrowed deep, festering under every achievement I tried to build. When Chloe was 12, she started modeling for local boutiques. My mother's eyes lit up as if she'd discovered gold. "Elena, take her photos," she ordered. "It's the least you can do for your sister's future." I held the camera steady as Chloe posed in sequins, her laughter bright and empty. I wanted to be angry, but instead, I memorized the way my mother's eyes softened only when directed at someone else. In college, I earned scholarships, worked nights, and graduated early. Chloe dropped out of art school and became an influencer overnight after one of her posts went viral. Guess who Catherine credited for the family's renewed fame? "Your sister's brand brings attention to all of us," she said over brunch. "You could learn from her." Learn what? How to turn validation into oxygen. How to sell fragments of yourself for applause. When I landed a job at a small PR firm downtown, my father dismissed it as paper pushing. He said I should join his company's reception desk to stay close to family. The irony was thick enough to choke on. But I stayed silent because silence was survival in that house. Every word was a potential weapon that could be twisted, quoted, or used to remind me of my place. Over the years, I became invisible by design. The quiet one, the sensible one, the one they could mock safely without consequence. When they spoke, I listened. When they bragged, I smiled. When they demanded, I delivered. That's how toxic families keep power, by convincing you that obedience is loyalty. The house itself reflected that toxicity. Marble floors that echoed with restraint. A dining room that smelled of money and cold ambition. Every picture on the walls told the same story, a perfect family frozen in performance. But there were no pictures of laughter, no snapshots of real joy, just curated illusions. Chloe's success became their shield, and my existence became their scapegoat. Every time I achieved something, they found a way to make it smaller. When I bought my first car, my father said, "Used, sensible, I suppose." When I received a promotion, my mother smiled thinly and said, "At least you're stable." Stable? As if mediocrity was my defining feature. They couldn't see that the quiet one had been watching, learning, preparing. The house taught me everything about power, not to crave it, but to understand how it worked. The night of Chloe's wedding, I walked into that ballroom not as their forgotten daughter, but as the one thing they never saw coming, the storm they created. The Brooks family liked to say we took care of our own. What they meant was that I took care of them. My sacrifices began long before I knew what the word meant. When I was 21, my father's real estate company faced a quiet scandal. An investor accused him of misrepresentation. I was working as a junior associate at a PR firm, then still paying off student loans. While my mother cried in silk robes and Chloe posted family strength quotes online, I was the one who stayed up 3 nights drafting statements, calling contacts, and salvaging what was left of the Brooks reputation. I even convinced my boss to take the family as a private client. The firm billed a discounted fee. I paid the difference out of my own pocket. When the crisis passed, my father announced at dinner, "We're back in the papers for the right reasons." My mother toasted Chloe for holding the family together with grace. No one mentioned my name. A year later, when Chloe got tangled in her first social media scandal, an insensitive luxury ad that triggered backlash, I ghostwrote her apology post, balanced empathy and accountability perfectly, and got it trending on redemption hashtags. Her follower count doubled within days. "My daughter has such emotional intelligence," my mother told a reporter. She meant Chloe, not me. I had stopped correcting her long ago. When the pandemic hit, my parents' properties sat empty for months. My father refused to admit financial strain, so I secretly redirected part of my savings to cover one of his unpaid property taxes. I told the accountant to list the wire under family support. He never knew. Chloe, meanwhile, called me to say she was emotionally exhausted and asked if I could edit her sponsorship contracts. I did. When she got engaged to Bradley Kent, she insisted I help plan the wedding because, as she put it, "You're organized, I'm the creative." I spent months coordinating florists, photographers, and press coverage while working full-time. I wasn't maid of honor. That role went to Tiffany, her influencer friend with 5 million followers. The night Chloe's engagement made the society pages, my mother sent me a photo of the article with a single line. "Finally, our family gets the recognition it deserves." I stared at that message for a long time, realizing she hadn't used the word love in years. That's what life with them was: transactional affection. The more I gave, the less they remembered. But I kept giving because somewhere inside me, the child version of Elena still believed that if I just gave enough, they might see me. Maybe they'd toast me at dinner once. Maybe my father would look proud instead of polite. Maybe my mother would say my name without comparison. But that moment never came. It wasn't until much later that I realized the truth. You can't earn love from people who use your worth as currency. Every sacrifice only feeds their hunger. My friends used to ask why I still showed up for family events, because I still owe them, I used to say. It sounded dutiful. It was really guilt, the guilt of being the one who saw through them, but stayed anyway. I remember the day I decided to stop waiting for recognition. I was standing in Chloe's dressing room after a photo shoot. She was crying because her favorite brand hadn't reposted her campaign. "It's like I don't exist to them," she sobbed. The irony nearly suffocated me. I said nothing, just handed her water and wiped her tears. That night, as I drove home through the snow, I whispered to my reflection in the windshield, "No more." But the habit of sacrifice doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers like perfume, sweet, cloying, suffocating. Even at Chloe's wedding, standing under those chandeliers, I could still feel its scent on me. What they didn't know was that my final act of sacrifice would also be my first act of liberation. Most people thought I stayed single because I was too focused on work. That was the narrative my mother liked to tell at luncheons, that I had chosen career over companionship, as if ambition was a disease. The truth was far simpler and far more dangerous to their illusion. I wasn't single. I was married to a man they would never believe I could attract, let alone deserve. His name was Julian Ward, the CEO of Ward Global Media. The first time we met, it wasn't at a gala or a cocktail event. It was in a crowded conference hall at a cybersecurity summit in D.C. I was there representing my firm. He was the keynote speaker. I remember how he stood on stage, sleeves rolled up, explaining the intersection between media ethics and digital responsibility. His voice was calm but commanding, and when he spoke about protecting truth, it didn't sound like a slogan, it sounded like a vow. After the panel, I introduced myself, half expecting to be forgotten by the next hour. Instead, he asked me a question that disarmed me completely. "Do you believe silence can ever be ethical?" I'd spent years mastering silence. That question cracked something open. We talked for hours that evening, long after the conference ended, about integrity, loneliness, and the quiet kind of strength no one celebrates. He didn't flinch when I mentioned my family. He only said, "You must be stronger than you think to survive that and still speak softly." Julian came from nothing. Raised by a single mother in Ohio, he built his company from his college dorm room. No inheritance, no shortcuts, just brilliance and discipline. He understood what it meant to be underestimated. That's what drew us together, the recognition of familiar scars. Our relationship was quiet, private, and deliberate. While Chloe broadcasted her every breakfast to her followers, Julian and I built something sacred out of the public eye. We married after 18 months in a courthouse ceremony on a gray Tuesday morning. No flowers, no photographers, no family. Just us, Harriet Nolan, my mentor and friend, as witness, and Michael Tran, Julian's assistant, holding the marriage certificate with a grin. "You sure you want to keep this a secret?" Harriet asked me quietly as we signed. "You know your family's going to find out eventually." I smiled. "I'd rather they find out when it matters." Julian agreed. "Let them define her by what they think they know. We'll redefine her by what's real." The next 3 years were a balancing act of power and anonymity. At work, I continued under my maiden name, Elena Brooks, the calm strategist who fixed crises for others. At home, I was Mrs. Ward, partner to one of the most influential media figures in the country. Julian never flaunted wealth. He used it like a scalpel, precise and quiet. Our life was understated dinners cooked together, late-night talks overlooking the Chicago skyline, shared plans whispered over coffee. He once told me, if power is loud, it's insecure. The real kind moves in silence. He was right. I wore no designer labels, drove a modest car, and still took public transit to meetings. My mother would have fainted if she'd known. Every secret I kept wasn't born of shame, it was protection. I wanted one piece of my life untouched by their judgment, one love unmeasured by status. The Brooks family could keep their castles and chandeliers. I had built my own empire, invisible and unbreakable. The only visible sign of my marriage was a simple platinum band I wore on a chain around my neck tucked under my blouse. On the day Chloe's wedding invitation arrived, Julian found me staring at it. "You don't owe them anything," he said. "I know. Then why go?" I looked up at him. "Because they still think I'm the daughter who stayed silent. Maybe it's time they met the woman who stopped." He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Then let's make sure they never forget." The wedding invitation arrived wrapped in gold foil so thick it could have doubled as armor. The envelope bore embossed letters that read, "The Brooks-Kent Union," as though marriage were a merger rather than love. Inside, the invitation sparkled with ornate calligraphy and a note in my mother's handwriting, "Black tie required." Family expected to represent the Brooks standard. I stared at that line for a long time. The Brooks standard. It meant perfection at all costs, humility only when performative, and love that depended on obedience. I placed the card on my kitchen counter beside the morning's headlines, ironically, an article about Julian finalizing a billion-dollar media acquisition. He walked into the room, tie, half-knotted coffee mug in hand, and caught the look on my face. "Your mother?" he asked. "My sister?" I said, sliding the envelope toward him. "Apparently, I'm expected to smile for the family brand." He opened the invitation, scanned it once, and raised an eyebrow. "Fairmont Langston Grand Ballroom. Of course, subtle as ever. They'll measure everything," I said quietly, "my dress, my shoes, my existence." He leaned against the counter, studying me. "Then wear what reminds you of who you are, not who they made you." His words landed like truth disguised as kindness. I nodded, running a finger over the soft fabric sample pinned to my sewing board. For weeks, I had been working on a design of my own, a dress made of muted blue satin, minimalist but precise, stitched with patience and purpose. It was elegant, not extravagant, the kind of beauty that whispered instead of screamed. "You're making your own gown?" Julian asked. I smiled faintly. "You once said power doesn't need to announce itself." He looked at me with quiet pride. "Then let them underestimate you." He was scheduled to travel to Tokyo for a major security summit on the same weekend as the wedding. "I can reschedule," he offered. "I don't need you to protect me," I told him. "They don't know who I am anymore. That's my advantage." "Still," he said, voice low, "I want to be there for the ending." "What ending?" I asked, even though I knew. "The ending of the story they've been telling about you," he said. "You don't have to say a word. Just let the truth walk in beside you when I arrive." His certainty steadied me. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in preparations not for their celebration, but for my confrontation with the ghosts of my upbringing. I rehearsed polite smiles in the mirror, the way one practices self-defense moves. Harriet, my friend from work, helped me select shoes elegant, comfortable, and pointed enough to remind me I could stand tall. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "I've been ready for years," I said. When the day arrived, Chicago was washed in early summer sunlight. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, wearing the finished gown, a soft blue that shimmered faintly under the light. The stitches were invisible, seamless, just like the years I had hidden my pain. I looked calm, but my pulse raced like thunder under silk. My phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. "Hope you bring something appropriate this time. Remember, no one wants drama at a wedding." I almost laughed. For someone obsessed with appearances, she had no idea how fragile hers really was. Julian appeared in the doorway, suitcase in hand, ready for his flight. He took one look at me and stopped. "You look unstoppable." "You mean presentable," I teased. "No," he said softly. "Unstoppable." He kissed my forehead, his touch grounding. "I'll land by 6. Try not to destroy them before I arrive." I smiled. No promises. As his car disappeared down the street, I turned back toward the mirror one last time. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the quiet daughter or the overlooked sister. I saw the woman they'd underestimated one too many times. And I knew by the time this day ended, the Brooks family would never see me the same way again. The Fairmont Langston Grand Ballroom glittered like something out of a dream you didn't want to wake up from, but I'd been inside enough of my family's illusions to know how dreams like this always ended. White orchids cascaded from chandeliers, a 10-piece orchestra hummed through Frank Sinatra classics, and hundreds of guests floated about like they'd rehearsed their movements in advance. Cameras flashed from every corner. The wedding hashtag #Chloe and Brad Forever was already trending by noon. I walked in alone, the hum of conversation thinning for half a second as the doors closed behind me. It was subtle, the collective shift of glances, the practiced smiles, but I'd lived through enough of their pity to recognize mockery disguised as civility. My dress caught the light soft blue satin that moved like breath, and that was enough to make my mother's mouth tighten. "Elena," Catherine called from her table, her pearls glowing against her throat. "You actually wore that? I suppose it's minimalist." Her tone stretched that last word until it snapped. A few nearby guests chuckled quietly. She always was the practical one, my father added, lifting his champagne. "Not everyone needs to shine after all." Their laughter blended with the clink of glasses, practiced and cruel. I smiled politely because silence was still my sharpest weapon. Chloe approached, then radiant and resplendent in a custom Vera Wang gown with a 20-foot train. She leaned in for a hug that was mostly air and whispered, "You made it. I'm honestly surprised." "So am I said evenly. "You look expensive." She laughed, missing the point. "Brad wanted it classic. You know old money chic. But don't worry, you blend right in with your handmade look. So authentic." She turned away before I could respond, her perfume a mixture of roses and condescension. I took my assigned seat at table 23 near the edge of the room beside a floral arrangement large enough to hide behind. Across the ballroom, my parents held court at the family table with the Kents laughing loudly at something I couldn't hear. When the maitre d' announced dinner, the staff moved like clockwork, plates of caviar and truffle risotto gliding past as conversations rose again. Elena Brooks, a woman beside me, said, squinting at the name card, "You're the older sister, right? The one in PR?" "Yes," I said, taking a sip of water. "How fascinating," she murmured. "You must have all sorts of stories about managing difficult images." I knew what she meant. The room seemed smaller suddenly, the chandeliers brighter. Every conversation felt like it had my name tucked inside. When the toasts began, I forced myself to stay still. Tiffany, Chloe's maid of honor, took the microphone first. "Chloe has always been like a sister to me," she began, beaming the kind I never had. Laughter rippled through the crowd. My throat tightened. I caught my mother's approving nod at Tiffany's line. She loved a well-placed insult. Then came my father. Today he announced, "Glass raised high we celebrate." Not just a union of two beautiful people, but a testament to excellence. Chloe has always embodied the Brooks spirit, grace, ambition, and vision. He paused for effect. "We couldn't be prouder." The applause was thunderous. And then, as if struck by inspiration, he added, "Of course, every family has its contrasts. Some children shine brighter in different ways. Humility, for instance." The laughter returned louder this time, polite yet merciless. I sat motionless, each chuckle slicing through me until the noise blurred into a dull roar. I'd spent my life letting these moments pass, convincing myself that silence was strength, but this time something inside me cracked cleanly. I rose from my seat and walked toward the terrace, ignoring the stares that followed. The evening air was cool, smelling faintly of orchids and arrogance. Behind me, the laughter carried on, muffled by glass. I gripped the balcony railing and looked out at the city lights, the skyline glittering like a promise. My phone buzzed. A single message from Julian Landing soon. "Be ready." My breath steadied. I turned back toward the ballroom, saw my reflection in the glass, still standing, still unbroken, and whispered to myself, "Let them laugh. They won't be laughing much longer." I stayed outside longer than I planned, the night air pressing against my skin like ice on a burn. Inside, the orchestra had shifted to something louder, faster. Chloe's curated soundtrack for the perfect evening. I could see her through the glass doors, spinning beneath the chandeliers, laughter bubbling like champagne. She looked exactly like the woman my mother had raised her to be: beautiful, admired, and hollow. I leaned against the stone railing and stared at the reflection of my own dress. It glimmered faintly under the terrace light's soft blue against the gold haze spilling from the ballroom. For a moment, I thought about leaving, walking away before they found another way to humiliate me. That's what I'd always done: retreat, rebuild, repeat. But this time, something inside refused to move. I thought about the years of invisible labor, the endless nights spent fixing their mistakes, cleaning their messes, carrying their image like it was my burden to bear. I thought about the lies my mother told, how she'd say to guests, "Elena's just shy," when really I was silenced. I thought about my father's voice, smooth and cruel, reminding me that success wasn't mine to claim. And then I thought about Julian, his calm eyes, his quiet conviction, the way he always said, "The truth doesn't need to shout, Elena, it just needs to arrive." My phone vibrated again, a second message lighting the screen. 5 minutes. I looked up, scanning the entrance below the terrace. A black limousine had pulled into the driveway. The security team moved first 2 men in dark suits, discreet but deliberate, positioning themselves near the ballroom doors. My pulse steadied, as if my body already knew the rhythm of what was coming. I walked back toward the glass doors, stopping when I caught sight of my mother. She was standing near the dessert table, surrounded by women dripping in diamonds, her laughter sharp and polished. I could almost predict the words leaving her mouth, something about me, something small, something safe for them to ridicule. The kind of cruelty you could serve with a smile. I pressed my hand against the glass, watching her silhouette blur. "You'll never understand what you taught me," I whispered. "How to survive in silence long enough to make noise that matters." When I stepped back into the ballroom, the air seemed to shift. The laughter still rang, but faintly distant, harmless. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was a woman who had nothing left to prove. My heels clicked against the marble as I crossed the room. Heads turned. I passed Chloe mid-conversation. She stopped talking when she saw me. Her smile faltered just slightly. Going somewhere, she asked, her tone light, but her eyes wary. "Yes," I said forward, her brows knit, confusion flickering across her perfect face. "Forward to what?" "You'll see." I didn't wait for her response. I reached for my clutch, retrieved a single folded card, Julian's name embossed on the back, and placed it on the nearest table. My mother noticed the gesture and frowned, suspicion shadowing her expression. "What's that dear?" she called. "A reminder," I said. She blinked, not understanding. I smiled. "That appearances don't protect anyone forever." Across the room, the main doors opened. The hush was immediate, like the air itself recognized authority. I turned slightly, catching sight of him as he entered. Julian moved with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere, yet claimed nowhere. The crowd didn't know who he was yet, but instinct made them step aside. My mother turned too, curiosity morphing into disbelief as the recognition spread. I felt the moment stretch, suspended between humiliation and reckoning. The music slowed, the chatter dimmed, and for the first time in 26 years, I wasn't the one shrinking in that room. I was the storm walking in beside him. The ballroom seemed to inhale as the double doors swung open. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze mid-air, and every head turned toward the tall man stepping into the light. Julian Ward didn't just enter a room, he claimed it. His gray Tom Ford suit fit like command itself, every line precise, every movement intentional. The chandeliers caught in his cufflinks, throwing sparks of light across the marble floor as he strode forward with the quiet authority of a man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Behind him, 2 security personnel flanked the entrance, scanning the room with professional indifference. Guests murmured in recognition. A few gasped outright. "Is that Julian Ward?" someone whispered. "The media CEO." Another voice. "He's on the cover of Forbes this month." My mother's face drained of color, her practiced smile faltering. My father rose halfway from his chair, confusion battling pride. Chloe blinked rapidly, the perfect bride's composure cracking like cheap porcelain. Julian's gaze found me, instantly cutting through the crowd as if no one else existed. For the first time all evening, I breathed. He crossed the room with long, deliberate strides, every eye tracking him, every whisper swelling into stunned silence. When he reached me, he didn't hesitate. He took my hand, his fingers warm, steady. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice low but carrying. "You're right on time," I answered, my voice calm, almost weightless. Gasps rippled through the room as he lifted our joined hands and pressed a brief kiss to my knuckles. My mother finally found her voice brittle as glass. "Julian!" "Ward," she stammered. "You know my name," he said politely. "That saves introductions." "Good evening, Mrs. Brooks." "Mr. Brooks." My father cleared his throat, his tone cautious, almost reverent. "We weren't expecting." "I imagine not," Julian interrupted gently. "You weren't expecting a great many things tonight." He turned to the room, his posture easy but his presence commanding. "Forgive the intrusion. I came to celebrate with my wife." The word detonated in the silence. Wife. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then whispers erupted like sparks catching dry grass. Wife. His wife. "He's married." My mother blinked as if trying to process a language she didn't speak. "Your wife?" she repeated, faltering. "That's impossible. Elena would have told you Julian finished for her. Perhaps if there had been room for listening." I stood beside him, saying nothing, my hand still in his. Chloe's expression hardened eyes flashing with the kind of disbelief that borders on panic. "You're joking," she said, her voice trembling under the weight of humiliation. "You're saying you him," married Julian confirmed evenly. 3 years ago. He let the statement settle, the weight of it bending the room into stillness. "We chose to keep it private for security reasons. And perhaps," he added, his gaze flicking to my parents to protect what mattered from what didn't. The murmurs grew, guests leaning toward each other in disbelief. Someone near the back whispered, "I thought she worked in PR." Another voice replied, "She does for him." My mother clutched her pearls as though they could anchor her. "You're telling me," she began slowly, "that my daughter is my equal," Julian said firmly, "in every sense that matters." The tone silenced her mid-breath. He turned to me, then his expression softening. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said quietly. "Just for me. Better than they deserve." "I learned from the best," I whispered back. The orchestra had stopped playing entirely now. Even the servers stood still, trays suspended midair. Chloe finally broke the silence with a brittle laugh. "So this was your big secret, marrying into power typical. You always wanted to one-up me." "You can't one-up someone who was never in the race," I said evenly. "I left it years ago." My mother swayed slightly, gripping my father's arm. "Elena," she said weakly, "why would you hide something like this?" I looked at her. The woman who taught me that worth was decoration, not character. "Because not everything real fits into your definition of perfect," I said. The words landed like truth and thunder. Julian's arm slipped protectively around my waist. "I think it's time they learn," he murmured. Then he turned back to the room. "You all wanted a spectacle. Consider this a lesson instead." The ballroom fell into a stunned, heavy silence, the kind that makes people hold their breath because something larger than them has just shifted. Julian still had one hand resting at the small of my back, a quiet gesture that radiated authority. Every pair of eyes flicked between us, between the man they recognized from magazines and the woman they'd dismissed an hour ago. "I'd like to say a few words," Julian announced, his voice deep and calm, amplified not by a microphone, but by absolute command. Not as a CEO, not as a guest, but as a husband. My mother opened her mouth, but my father's hand tightened on her arm. "Julian, Mr. Ward," he stammered, "this really isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." Julian interrupted, still polite, still deadly calm. "Because sometimes people mistake cruelty for sophistication. They forget that wealth doesn't excuse indecency." His words hit like slow-moving lightning, illuminating everything they'd tried to hide. I felt the air shift, tension coiling like a wire ready to snap. He nodded to someone near the back, the head of his security detail. The lights dimmed slightly, and a soft hum filled the room as two massive screens flickered to life on either side of the ballroom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. On screen appeared the logo of Ward Global Media. My mother's hand flew to her chest. "Julian, what is this?" "A demonstration," he said simply. "Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, but it became a lesson in how easily dignity can be trampled when people believe their status makes them untouchable." The screens shifted to display a new headline: U.S. Department of Defense. Signs $400 million cybersecurity contract with Ward Global Media. The crowd murmured louder now. Someone whispered, "That's the deal everyone's been talking about." Julian continued his gaze steady on my parents. That contract was negotiated and presented by the lead communications strategist for Ward Global Media, your daughter, Elena Ward. The applause started hesitantly, then grew, filling the silence that had once mocked me. My mother swayed like she'd been struck. My father's jaw worked soundlessly. "She did that," someone near the front whispered. "The quiet one, the one in the handmade dress," another replied. Julian wasn't finished. "She has built reputations, protected companies, and guided leaders. She's the reason tonight's media coverage will focus on grace instead of scandal, though it could have gone either way." His eyes found mine softening. "I didn't marry into your family's image. She saved mine." Then he turned, addressing the guests directly. "You've just witnessed the difference between wealth and worth. One can be inherited, the other has to be earned." The room erupted into murmurs again, this time mixed with admiration and discomfort. My mother's carefully constructed social circle was cracking in real time. "Julian," my father said, trying to salvage composure, "we had no idea." "That's the point," Julian cut in. "You never asked." Catherine's voice trembled. "We're proud of her," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "We always have been." I turned toward her, every word crystal clear. "Pride isn't something you declare when people are watching. It's something you show when no one is." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. You could almost hear the weight of truth settling into the cracks of the marble floor. Julian glanced toward the orchestra, and as if on cue, they resumed playing softly, filling the space that humiliation had once owned. "That's enough for tonight," he said gently, placing his arm around me again. "Let's leave them their mirrors." I nodded, exhaling for the first time in what felt like years. Around us, faces shifted, some ashamed, some in awe, others calculating how to rewrite their loyalty in real time. I didn't look back at my parents. I'd spent my entire life waiting for them to see me. Tonight they finally did, and it broke them more than it ever broke me. In the weeks that followed, the echo of that night refused to fade. It pulsed through every corner of Chicago's high society, whispered over brunches, dissected in glossy magazines, murmured at charity galas. The Brooks wedding scandal, they called it. Clips of my father's toast, his cruel joke about family contrasts, circulated online beside footage of Julian's arrival. The hashtags shifted from hashtag Chloe and Brad forever to #the real Brooks daughter. For once, I wasn't invisible. But visibility wasn't revenge, it was exposure. My family's empire of image had begun to crumble, not because I tore it down, but because truth finally found the cracks they'd built it on. Charles Brooks lost two of his biggest clients within a month. Investors cited ethical concerns. His company's PR team resigned in quiet succession. He called me once, voice subdued, asking if I could help draft a statement. "You're the expert, Elena. You've always known how to fix things." I almost pitied him. "That's the problem, Dad," I said softly. "You always assumed I'd fix what you broke." My mother, once a fixture of every social committee and charity board, found her invitations dwindling. "Optics," they told her. "We can't risk association." She tried to spin the narrative, giving interviews about forgiveness and family resilience, but the internet is merciless when it smells hypocrisy. Every word she'd ever spoken about elegance was replayed beside the video of her smirking as I was humiliated. Even Chloe's empire cracked. Brands distanced themselves, sponsorships vanished. Her comments section turned brutal, people calling her Cruella Brooks, the jealous bride influencer with no heart. She posted teary videos insisting the incident was taken out of context, but every apology only fueled the mockery. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that built its throne on image had been dethroned by exposure. Julian and I stayed silent. That was the final twist. The justice wasn't in vengeance, but in absence. There were no statements from us, no public explanations. Just a photo of me at the Women in Media Ethics Conference 2 months later captioned, "Grace speaks loudest when silence has done its job." The world drew its own conclusions. One morning, a courier delivered a letter to our penthouse thick paper, my father's handwriting. Inside was a short note. "We never meant to hurt you. We were trying to protect what we built." Maybe we lost sight of who we built it for. No signature. No apology. Just words from a man realizing the mirror had turned back on him. I didn't respond. Karma had already written its answer. The following week, Catherine Brooks's charity Pearls for Promise quietly dissolved. Its last financial report showed missing funds. Rumor had it that one of her own board members exposed her for creative accounting. It wasn't criminal, but it was humiliating. She went silent on social media after that. As for Chloe, her downfall was the loudest. A leaked audio clip surfaced her mocking an assistant for wearing cheap shoes. The internet devoured her within hours. Her apology tour was pitiful. "People misunderstand me," she sobbed into her ring light. But no one was listening anymore. The world had seen the pattern too clearly. Beauty without kindness, charm without soul. Meanwhile, Julian's company soared. Investors praised his ethics and transparency, the same traits my parents once dismissed as naivety. When journalists asked him about that unforgettable wedding, he smiled and said, "Every empire collapses when truth finally gets invited to the table." Then he changed the subject. "We never used the scandal to elevate ourselves. We didn't have to. Justice doesn't always arrive in sirens and headlines. Sometimes it comes quietly disguised as consequence." The Brooks name, once synonymous with prestige, became a cautionary tale whispered among the elite. And me, the invisible daughter, became a ghost they couldn't stop seeing. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't need to. There was nothing satisfying about watching people drown in the same shallow waters they once pushed you into. I only felt clarity, and in that clarity, peace. The same peace that comes when you finally stop waiting for the apology that will never come. 6 months after the wedding, a cold November rain fell over Chicago like a cleansing the city hadn't asked for. Julian was away on business in New York, and I was home alone reading reports for a new ethics initiative we were funding. The doorbell rang just after 8. When I opened it, 2 silhouettes stood beneath the awning, my parents. Catherine looked smaller than I remembered, her perfectly coiffed hair plastered to her temples, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. Charles stood behind her umbrella, trembling slightly in his hand. "Elena," my mother whispered. We didn't know where else to go. I didn't invite them in right away." The rain poured harder, blurring the skyline behind them into streaks of gray. I remembered being 17, standing in that same kind of rain outside our house, while she told me Brooks girls don't cry. We compose ourselves. Now she was the one shaking. "We were wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "We built a house of mirrors and called it love." I stepped aside, silently letting them in, the air filled with the scent of wet wool and regret. My father set the umbrella down, avoiding my eyes. "We lost everything," he said quietly. "Clients, friends, reputation." "You still have each other," I said evenly. He gave a dry laugh. "We've been strangers in the same room for 30 years. Losing the world didn't cost us much, realizing we lost you did." The words hit harder than I wanted them to. My mother looked around the apartment, eyes lingering on the family photos lining the shelves, Julian and me laughing over coffee, hiking, standing in front of the Tokyo skyline. Her lip trembled. "You look happy," she said. "I am," I answered simply. "He treats you well. He treats me like I exist." The silence stretched thick with all the years they'd wasted chasing admiration instead of connection. Finally, Catherine spoke again, her voice a whisper. "We were cruel. We thought we were protecting our legacy, but all we did was bury our daughter under it." Her hands twisted together, pearls missing from her neck for the first time I could remember. "Can you forgive us?" The question should have felt like victory. It didn't. I looked at them, two people hollowed out by their own illusions, and realized forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me. I already have, I said softly. But forgiveness isn't a return ticket. My mother's breath caught. I wish you peace, I interrupted gently, but I can't step back into a world that almost erased me. She nodded slowly, tears sliding down. My father swallowed hard, his pride cracking in the quiet. You're better than us, he said finally. No, I replied. Just free. I walked them to the door. The rain had softened into a mist, the city glistening beneath streetlights. Catherine hesitated at the threshold. Elena, she murmured, your father would never admit it, but he knows what he did. That night was unforgivable. He talks about it in his sleep. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest she'd ever come. Thank you for saying that, I said. Take care of each other. As they stepped into the rain, I saw their figures blur in the drizzle, two ghosts walking away from the ruins they built. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Julian called later that night. You okay? He asked. They came by, I said. They finally said what they should have said years ago. And how do you feel? I thought about it for a moment, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. Light, I said. For the first time in my life, I feel light. A year later, the city looked different. Maybe it was the way I looked at it now, not as the daughter trying to fit in, but as a woman who had finally built her own belonging. That spring, Julian and I hosted the first annual gala for the Brooks Foundation for Women in Media Ethics, an organization we created to support truth-telling and fair representation in journalism. The same ballroom that had once echoed with my humiliation now shimmered under soft lighting and purposeful grace. Instead of champagne gossip and judgmental eyes, the room was filled with people who believed in accountability, empathy, and rebuilding. Harriet, my mentor, handled logistics with her usual brilliance. You ready for this? She asked as we stood backstage. It's poetic, you know, coming full circle in the same place they tried to break you. I smiled. That's the thing about mirrors. If you stop fearing them, you can make them reflect what's true. When Julian took the stage to introduce me, the applause was thunderous, but not the kind that worships, it was the kind that recognizes. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice calm, proud. Tonight isn't about power, it's about integrity. The woman you're about to hear from has shown me that silence isn't weakness. It's a seed waiting for the right moment to speak. His eyes found mine across the room, steady as ever. Please welcome my wife, Elena Ward. I stepped up, heart steady. The lights were warm, not blinding. I looked out over the audience faces from across industries, journalists, executives, survivors of toxic workplaces, and I spoke not to impress, but to connect. A year ago, this room witnessed cruelty dressed as class, I said. A ripple of quiet recognition spread through the crowd. But life has a way of turning pain into purpose if you let it. What was once mockery became a mirror. What was once humiliation became a movement. And what was once silence became a voice mine. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand the spotlight. It waits. And when it rises, it doesn't need permission. The applause began softly, then grew until the room vibrated with it. From the back row, I noticed two familiar faces, my parents. They sat quietly, not at the center as they once demanded, but near the edges like people learning humility for the first time. My mother's eyes glistened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My father gave a small nod when I met his gaze, no expectation, no performance, just acknowledgement. It was enough. After the speeches, as the gala continued, Chloe approached me. I hadn't seen her since that night. She looked different, tired, humbled, but softer somehow. You look beautiful, she said quietly. I used to think that meant designer labels. Turns out it's something else. I studied her, waiting for the trap, but none came. Just honesty. I lost everything, she admitted. Friends, sponsors, followers. But I found something else. Perspective. That's more than most ever find, I said. She hesitated. Do you think we'll ever be okay? We already are, I said. We just stopped pretending. A tear slipped down her cheek and she laughed softly. You sound like Julian. He'd take that as a compliment, I replied. As the night ended, I stepped onto the terrace where it had all begun a year earlier. The city stretched before me, glowing under the quiet hum of streetlights. Julian joined me, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. It's strange, I said, to stand here and not feel small anymore. That's because you were never small, he replied. They just built rooms that couldn't contain you. I leaned into him, the breeze soft against my skin. They mocked my dress, I murmured, half smiling, but it was sewn by the same hands that rebuilt my life. Julian smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. And that, he said, is something no money, no family name, no empire can ever buy. The orchestra inside began to play again, soft, warm, almost forgiving. I took one last look at the ballroom, then at the skyline beyond it, and whispered to myself, I came here to end a lifetime of silence. I leave here knowing peace speaks louder